So basically, thanks to you guys for coming and kind of hearing us talk through what we're doing. And I'm sure what we'll do by the end of the day is leave everyone, including ourselves, with more questions and ideas than we have answers now. But I think for us, it's been a process of getting at more of the issues and how we can talk about what we do differently. So Ted Williamson and Dr. Dwight Fontenot are both here with me, and we're just really going to try and give an overview of what we do in CSP and really invite people to ask questions, you know, certainly raise hands or jump in if you'd like to. Our program has changed a lot. And so we have this statement, which basically is something that came out of a retreat that we had for the all staff. In light of recent legal changes on the campus, changes to admissions, we wanted to talk about what we actually do. And it had been a narrower program initially. There were multiple programs supporting cohorts on campus, and what we needed to do was sort of affirm that we support diversity and student retention and success, but that we do it in a slightly different way now. And our group in Comprehensive Studies is a very diverse group of students, but they are the students who most need focus. So we're always trying to look statistically at who is struggling, why might they be struggling, and address the needs of those folks on campus. And so this is a little bit of the history with Summer Bridge is a program within Comprehensive Studies. So in Comprehensive Studies, we've got advising, instruction, and a very large summer program. And they really are three separate things. The advising and instruction happens all through the 4 years. Most of the classes are targeted at the entry level, the first 2 years, but we sometimes have students who will loop back and say, I'd like to do CSP 100 now and sort of reflect on what I'm doing. They will take the classes that prepare them for their concentration, and then they move into getting some advising in their concentration, but they still actually get a lot of advising from us as well. And the instruction changes. That's another thing that we're looking at. How can we offer the right classes, the right number of classes? So it's been mostly focused in the science areas. We do a lot of writing courses partnering with Sweetland, but we are trying to get at those classes that are sometimes barriers for students depending on what school system they came from. The Summer Bridge program, which is what we mostly want to talk about today, is a program that starts in the summer term. It's the fastest 7 weeks you've ever seen go by, and we have a target of 250 students. That includes several groups. What we look for in admissions, I'm on the admissions committee, and what we look for are students, like it says here, that where the average ACT is about 22, which on this campus, the average incoming ACT is a 30 or above. But you have students who've gone to a school where the average for their school is well below 22. And if they're achieving a 22, 25 in that range, they're actually outperforming all of their peers in their school system. They're highly motivated students with high grade points, incredible applications, and we want to give them a chance. But we know that content-wise and academically, they're going to be hugely advantaged by coming and starting in the summer. I don't know how much people know about Descriptor Plus. It's a separate, complicated sidebar, but basically what it is a way to look at differences amongst students who apply and try to make sure that as a public institution, we're reaching out to the broadest range of students as possible. So it's roughly looking at different school systems and geographic pockets. And there are times where we'll take someone whose profile is extremely different from your average incoming student. SES might be different, so their economic status, there may not have even been any AP classes at their school, but we haven't had a representative from that school in a while. So we'll also try to look at some of those instances and give students a chance to just be part of the mix at Michigan if we think that this is the right place for them. It was originally a very Detroit-focused program. People on campus still kind of remember it as a small, very homogeneous cohort where the students looked a lot more alike, had a similar background and experience, and that was a group that you could address issues with in one way. We now have a very, very diverse group, including international students and students of almost every kind, I would say, in every category. We've got some students. And then really, this I guess sums up the admissions criteria that we look at. Basically, the Summer Bridge program is a program that has operated on campus and grown rapidly in the last couple of years. And so what we've done in just, I would say, the past couple of months more intensely before we have this next summer's class is tried to look at what numbers do we have? How do we see patterns of change? How do we understand what our goals are and then what we can measure so that we're doing the things that we think have the right outcome? So with that, I'll actually turn it over to Dr. Fontenot and let him talk a little bit about exactly why we do what we do in Bridge. But does anyone have questions or anything? I mean, I'm happy to. What a good class.
Can you say about where Descriptor Plus comes from?
Yeah, well, to my understanding, and I don't see anybody else from Ellis and AD. Yeah, do you?
I mean,
Well, that's what you might have.
it's a college board project.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and they do it based on the school, for one, you get one code for school and one code for the student's like neighborhood. So it's a good geodemographic.
And I mean, the last time we used it for the school, for like 32 types of schools. So
Yeah.
we've got large, inner city, low income,
Right.
small,
A lot of
rural,
categories.
whatever.
Yeah.
So they're all put in categories. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I would also say that part of what we're always looking at is there's the world of numbers, and then there's the world of when students come and look at each other and try and figure out, why are we all here? How are we all alike? And I think Descriptor Plus in some ways has broadened the group that is in Bridge in ways that you really can't ignore. I think the other thing worth noting is again and again the statistics about socioeconomic status as being the greatest barrier on this campus. That is the one thing that you will find really quickly amongst the Bridge class. These are students whose community, for whatever reason, had a different socioeconomic status, and their schools gave them all that that school could give, and they got all they could out of it, but it was a very different experience than people in other areas. So I think that is really how students kind of read it. The reality is that it's a lot of different metrics about the populations they come from. But here, I'll give you this now. I don't know if you want to wear it or hold it. It's up to you.
I do hope you have just an appreciation for how different Bridge students are from the other students that you might see across the campus. Meg talked a lot about socioeconomic status, but we're living in a situation where the income about the families of our students is going up, and the discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots is increasing. The number of our students who now qualify for a federal grant is going down. It's now less than 20% of our student population. And so I want to give you an understanding of just how different the Bridge students might be from other students that you have, but still help you understand that this program has been around since 1975. And so we see Bridge as an intervention model for students who have not had the opportunities that other students have had to continue their work here at the campus like the University of Michigan. I think later on you'll see some of our results and to see just how well we're doing this particular job. And a part of my hope is that through this process of conversation with you, that you'll help us understand how better to think about what we do, how better to measure what we do, so we can figure those things out. So I'm mainly responsible for the particular goals of the Bridge program and trying to figure out how to make certain that these goals are realized through everyday activities. It's not just a one-time thing. We work with them for all the entire 7 weeks, and even before they get here, we are working with this group of students in order to help them figure out how they can mandate and keep the focus on what they do. So one of the things we do is academic skill building. We do assessments of all of their beginning academics. So they do the regular Sweetland writing placement test that every entering student does. They also do a writing test for us that our writing faculty meet on a Sunday and read all of those essays to see exactly how well they're doing. So we try to do different sorts of assessments, not just the general university assessments, but other assessments for us. We look at assessments with the mathematics, and so they take the regular University of Michigan math placement test, but they also take a math placement test for us where we can get more detail about where the discrepancies in the math education is, and we can place them into courses that will help them meet that particular need. For our math placement test, it is pre-calculus or calculus, and there's a wide range of what those skill levels might be. We try to be more specific about those things, and so we put our students to build their academic skills in what we call our intensive courses. Our intensive course model happens in the fall and winter term as well as in Bridge, but that intensive course means they have a faculty person who's dedicated to teaching them. One of the good things about working at CSP is that the staff at CSP is extremely committed to the work they do. I've never been in a place where the people who work are that committed on a day-by-day basis to the kinds of work they do. So we have extensive intensive courses where the classes meet for longer times, and there are mandatory sort of meetings with the faculty members. And so you have to meet with your writing faculty on a regular basis. You have to meet with your CSP 100 faculty 3 times in the semester. You have to meet with your math faculty in the evening. So you have to meet with them. Not only are we teaching skills, but we're showing them how to interact with faculty. So we're modeling more than one thing throughout that process of extended course times, extended office hours. We have one faculty member that gives people her home phone number, and they call her at 2 o'clock in the morning, and she's more than willing to answer the question at 2 o'clock in the morning. Her thing is, if you come to my class tomorrow morning and you don't know how to work the problem and you didn't ask, that's bad. It's always better to ask than not ask. And so we have very flexible faculty, very flexible office hours. We have these mandatory meetings, and we also have course assistants. We have some of our former students and other students across the university come and be in-class tutors for those classes. So every math class has a course assistant attached to it. Every writing class has a course assistant attached to it. Every CSP 100 class has a course assistant attached to it. And that course assistant is to help with the instruction in the class, as well as the students' understanding of the instruction, and to help them overcome any obstacles they might have. So one of the biggest things we have to do with our students is to help them assess their own academic skills and give them the tools to improve in areas that need improving. The second thing we try to do in our intervention program is to look at this concept called academic self-efficacy. Some people call it metacognitive skills, self-regulated learning. We really want to be able to understand how students interact with the institution. And so we want to know what their academic self-confidence is. How confident are they in their interactions with faculty, with their interactions with other students, and in their interactions with this particular campus. And so we do sort of looking at self-regulated learning. We take students through steps in our CSP 100 seminar where they learn to manage their own time. They learn to monitor their own resources. They learn to manage their relationships around them so that they can maintain that confidence in getting the work done that they want to do. We try to look at optimism. We try to look at motivation. We try to look at the ability to monitor and plan and revise your plan. All those things that happen in what people call metacognitive strategies for learning. But we're calling it academic self-efficacy because it has more to do with how confident the student is in approaching those things. And when you take students from an environment where they have not had that opportunity to interact with faculty in an enriched setting, these are sorts of things that we try to arrange our courses and our activities around so that students might have that benefit. The next thing we do is try to understand their sense of belonging. One of the big things that the research tells us about student retention is that if students feel like they are a part of the campus, if they feel like they belong to the campus, then they're going to stay there longer. And you take a group of people who are less like everybody else on the campus, and you want to try to instill in them a sense of belonging. And so we try to teach them what the institution is about. The Bridge students actually know more about the University of Michigan campus than other students because we take them around. We visit the historical sites. We take tours in the museums. We use the libraries. We use all these things on campus so they can see what's here for them, therefore heightening that sense of institutional belonging. And so we try to expose them to the learning resources, the campus communities, the residence halls. We have our summer peer advisors who are living with them in the residence hall. We hire a staff of students to live with them to model the appropriate academic behavior and to help them understand how to make that connection from their high school to college. It's always important for me to stop and remind myself that the people who come to Bridge graduated less than 2 weeks before they walked on campus. And so they have very little time for that sort of thinking about what it means to be an adult, to get all of my play out of me before I go to college and be a real person. They have very little time to do that. Some of them, our students from New York, graduate the day before they come. So we have students who graduate on Saturday and get on the plane and come straight to college. And so there isn't that sort of time to figure out your place. And so we have to provide them an opportunity to see how they connect to campus and see how they belong. And so since we've got a diverse group of students, we try to find diverse ways for them to connect to campus. This past year, we were at the Botanical Gardens. We've done museum tours, and we try to look at all the learning communities to make certain students are aware of all of those options and opportunities. We work with the Intergroup Relations Program. We've worked with Europe, with other things, so students can find ways to make this institution smaller and feel like they really belong and really matter here. And what we're finding over time is a lot of our Bridge students end up leaders throughout the community, and they are students who are doing great and wonderful things. The last thing we look at as far as developing our students in this intervention program, I'd like to call it, is social skill development. You have to learn how to integrate socially into this particular environment. And so we have to begin to approach diversity. CSP has a different idea, I think, of diversity than many other places. We see it as everybody's issue and not just our issue. More often than not, people think that's something somebody else does. We see diversity as something that everybody ought to participate in and ought to do. And so we teach our students and our staff that sort of thing, that everybody's responsible for this. So there will be a wide variety of students. And so we want to understand different identities and how those identities are developed and appreciated and welcomed on this particular campus. We look at interactions with peers, with organizations, with student groups, with other people in the residence hall, everybody else who's here in the summer. We want them to understand that sort of lifelong learning process that faculty at the University of Michigan want students to do. And we also plan events for them to understand what the campus is about, what the community is about, and to begin to feel an appreciation for the opportunity to study at a place like Michigan. It's really important that they begin to see themselves as valued members of the community. And so we find ways for them to contribute in significant ways to what happens on campus while they're here in the summer. We're finding that our students, we take them through these sorts of intervention programs in this model, that they are coming out with a better sense of adjustment. They are, in their first semester, they do exceptionally well. They are better adjusted than first-year students. They know more things about the campus, and they really are developing into leaders in and across the campus. Any questions that I can answer before we go?
You did mention that you try to evaluate the students independent of the university's admissions evaluations, and you said that there's more detail in that, and I can imagine why you would need more detail in that. Have you also looked, just out of curiosity, at whether the evaluations kind of come back with the same indicators, or whether there is sort of a lot of noise in that measurement?
The evaluations the university use are kind of global. It's either this or that. So if I do the writing test, I do writing 100, or you do freshman composition. Our evaluations will look in more detail. And so we often find, I want to walk carefully. I'm biased about the Sweetland thing. We often find that the university evaluations do a poorer job at evaluating our students' writing than what we do. Oftentimes, the writing evaluation is based on the answer to the questions that you ask and not the writing that you actually do. So Sweetland doesn't read every essay that people turn in. They only read certain essays, and the evaluation is made on a list of questions that you answer. And the questions about the kind of writing that happened at your high school, the kind of classes you took at your high school, whether or not you're comfortable writing this many papers. And if you've not been to a school where that's been your record, then you're going to automatically be placed into the Writing 100 course. What we try to do is take that information, as well as the essay that they wrote for the writing, as well as an essay that they write for us, and try to look at the writing and look in detail. Are these grammatical issues? Are these construction issues? Are these contextual issues? And be able to help design the writing course to meet that particular need. The same sort of thing with mathematics. We look at not just, the math test says pre-calculus, mathematics or calculus. What we try to do is take that information and our test, which looks at whether students have difficulty with algebraic manipulation, with fractions, with logarithms, with trigonometric functions, to try to have more detail as we teach the class to make certain we can meet those needs.
The other thing I would add too is that we actually have really good partnerships with those departments, because we don't hire anyone ourselves. So in fact, with the Sweetland thing, we've talked to Anne and Naomi a lot about how what they have is something that's in the context of an admission. So we save all those scores. We actually give those essays to the instructors. So what we do, I guess it's like it's an additional thing. And we've talked to Anne about how that gives us one picture, but it doesn't do this other piece that we need. And the math one, I think this year, it's not data that we brought with us, but again, any of this stuff we bring up that people want to follow up with. The math, really specifically, we now have 3 different syllabi that we're going to submit to the curriculum committee that really tie to what the instructors are seeing people not knowing. So we're trying to actually build some courses that respond to the gaps that we see. Is the gap so large that they need a humanities-focused option for their QR because they may never need calc in their program? Is it that between 105 and 115 there's some real specific material that they need? And that, so actually we have that stuff as well. So we save that data and have used it this year in particular to try and build the courses that we think will help. And we've had some talks with Tim even about how we might then try to get what Denise is doing. Denise coordinates our Bridge math program, and really measure, because we grade all their homework in a way that's different than the way the math program is able to do it for all the regular undergrads in 105. So we can actually see the data. So what is it? Is it this type of fraction? Is it this type of equation? What really specifically might the student need feedback to say, practice this more because this is your gap? So we're trying to sort of push the limits of how we can do it, because the group has gotten so large that the diversity of their experience is pretty extreme.
Right.
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay, so do you want to show us data if you can?
So as you can imagine, there's a lot of data that I'm asked to pull in every year. My focus is on operations and data, managing our curriculum, ensuring that students are in the right courses. But every year we've got this unique set of 250 or less students that we need to present data on. So the things we look at are what are trends over the years. Do our students improve? Are they coming from schools that are raising the grade point average from the same group of students, or from a different group of students from the same school? So our real focus is around, what are we looking at? We're looking at things like gender, ethnicity, high school number. So, and as we go on, and as we're doing projects like we're doing with Tim and with Zach, we can take a lot of this data and we can look at students in a certain situation and enable them to be more successful based on the history of other students. So some of the things that I look at are really, how are they doing each year? We track a group of students each year after Bridge. We see what classes they're struggling with, what classes they're succeeding in. And here's our retention rate. I know it's kind of hard to read this from the back of the room, but essentially this is a group of students starting from 1996 to 2005. So that's the last year. We can do a 6-year study to the current year. And as you can see, we've got percentages that were 15 or so years ago in the 50s to today in the upper 70s, 77%. And again, I've looked into great detail in terms of reasons. There's a number of students that just disappeared, but they had good grade point averages to continue. So we don't know if it was a financial issue or they transferred to another school. So our numbers continue to grow up every year, as do the number of students that we see. So it's a good trend, and we hope to see that continue to rise upwards. Any questions on this slide? Yes.
Do you do 4-year
Yes.
graduation rate as well?
Yeah, and it's
Sort of how that compares?
yeah, and I actually did a slide on that earlier for a different meeting, and typically that number is lower because our average student is about, would you say, 5 years, 4.5 years. So the numbers, and in many cases there are economic reasons. In other cases, our students are being smart, not piling it on and taking 16 credits every semester. Many are taking 12 or 15 or less. I know many undergraduates prefer not to go over 15 credits, and if you're not going to make that level, it's hard to finish in 4 years. So I think the numbers were probably 15 points below on each level, if I recall exactly, but I can get you that if you're interested. And then specifically, the other things we look at, again, with this group of students is, what is their average GPA today? Obviously, the Bridge 2011 is high because we haven't gotten their fall grades, and this was just on their summer bridge. But if you look at Bridge 2009 and 2010, they're only 1/100th or 2/100ths of a point off. So pretty consistent. We have some very high GPAs, some very low. Average ACT all 3 years of these incoming students are 22. So again, we've had pretty good incoming GPAs. This column pulled over when we changed our font. But as you can see, that's risen a little bit from 3.33 in 2009 to 3.43 today. And we've had no students that were suspended for any other reasons. We've had a few in the previous years. In 2009, that number's a little higher.
People have questions on these? I mean, there might be a few things I would add on this, or I don't know if people have questions. A couple of things I would add here, which were things that I sort of learned. I mean, numbers can tell one part of the story, but another thing to keep in mind when you look at number of students dismissed, suspended, those type of things, we actually also have responsibility for a number of scholarship athletes who are here to be both athletes and students, and that cohort has a really unique demographic. And so a lot of times when we just show our CSP or our bridge numbers, you have to keep in mind that you're also seeing students who came in. The average ACT in that cohort is extremely different, and the average, persistence and retention is, for other reasons, also very different and somewhat out of our control. So these are things where we're looking at compiling as much data as we can, and then in many cases looking at, are there cohorts that we maybe should take out? Because in actuality, it's probably not fair for me to judge the participants, the team on my program about some of those issues when so much for that particular cohort is out of our control. So if people ever had questions about some of our numbers or wanted to see subsets of things, we're happy to share that. I certainly share the small cohort of, say, the football scholarship athletes. We give them their numbers regularly, and it's a very different set, and they have to respond as best they can to that persistence and retention. So we often pull out little subsets. The other thing is the GPAs. I often have people, certainly in LS&A, which is the college that we're under, although we serve all the colleges, a lot of the faculty point out to me that coming out of Bridge, they're not taking gimme classes. They're actually being graded in a way that is commensurate with the way they'll be graded on campus the rest of the time. So our average grade shows that they're learning to compete on this campus. It's not that the Bridge classes or CSP classes are easy A by any long shot. And I think the other thing between, the numbers that you see up there is we definitely see it as a challenge and something to work on. Graduation is one thing, but graduating with a high and comparable GPA on a campus where the average graduation rate is 90%, and a much higher GPA is something that, that's a gap we're also trying to close. So those are, there are other separate issues altogether.
Sure, you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I understand that the 2009 students have been here longer, but still the number of dismissed and suspended students looks very high compared to the other years.
I won't go into that, but in that category, I would think Rich Rod and move on.
Okay, yeah.
There are just some things we can't, like I could pull that out. If someone were really going to submit a paper for publication or something, and frankly, that subset, White does a lot of work with different cohorts, and that subset, they deserve as much support and study more, really, yeah. But as a subset, it's a real challenge and a totally different one. An incoming ACT that is a very different picture, yeah. So that one, we can always pull those and look at them differently.
And it's roughly 10% of our summer bridge numbers are in that category. Yes?
So that's suspended, dismissed for other than academic reasons as well, or is it across the board just suspended?
Both. This category is both.
It's both, but the way that not succeeding on this campus plays out, it will have that result, it will get called one of those two things.
What's the difference between-
Standards boards, people like, do you want to answer that, Kathy? The difference between those two, or do I?
The difference, school suspension is temporary and dismissal is permanent.
Yep.
So usually they're dismissed if they have a really large honor point deficit. If they're suspended, they have a chance to petition for readmission, usually after at least a semester away.
Right.
Yep.
Right, and we know that that's kind of what's going on with those numbers right there.
So the other thing we look at is really who are our students, specifically race and gender-wise. And for many years, the female to male ratio has continued to accelerate. And again, as you can see, very diverse group. Some groups aren't really represented as high as we'd hope. But again, we have the total numbers here indicated. The red is female, the blue is male in each of these columns. And again, these are the same 3 years, same groups of students. These are the students that were admitted. The previous slide showed the students who are still here.
Do you have thoughts as to why that male-female ratio prevails?
Oh, we have thoughts.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I don't even want to take that one.
The schools that we are drawing the majority of our students from are urban high schools. The number of males that graduate from urban high schools is less than 30%. The number of males that graduate from urban high schools that qualify for the University of Michigan is less than 10%. And so it's a very small pool, and it's a shrinking pool. It is a cause of concern for most colleges and universities across this campus, but you have those sorts of situations where men are not succeeding. And we do this as we're trying to get it everybody who can, but there aren't that many who finish and who are able to compete with those numbers.
Okay, you have a question? Okay. All right. So again, these are some of the current research projects that we're doing, areas of data gathering, things that the whole reason we're all here to talk about are, these are just a smattering of them. There's several other projects that we're doing. I'm doing a project really to research in great detail who's below that norm on our group. So the 21s and below, how are they doing? What are their challenges? And again, as you can see, we're doing quite a bit of research in many different areas. The last one, of course, is a project that, I don't know if you've mentioned it here. We haven't talked about it a lot, but we're doing quite a bit of other work. Dr. Kumba's doing work with many of our CSP students who excel in Calc 1 and Calc 2 and helping them become mentors. So he's working closely with the math department. Kelly Allen and Charles Taylor, who are two of our English lecturers, presented a paper called Recasting the Net, specifically around embracing technology rather than, turning off Wi-Fi in every classroom, but finding ways to leverage that and working with the School of Information on their BiblioBouts application. And we're also working, and it's been hard, but working on a grant to get iPads for classrooms for ebooks for our students, many of whom buying books are very expensive, and we're looking at those areas as well. So, and that was all I had. And again, this is the portrait I took of our 2010 class.
It is a whole.
It is a lot of people. I had to use a really wide angle lens. All right, so that's all I had.
General questions. I certainly just would also want to conclude by, thanking Dwight and Ted for coming with and presenting. I think the technology and research things tend to be things that I really love, but the team there is just amazing. And I think that there were a couple of years where the growth in comprehensive studies was exponential, and we kind of had to pause, and we added Ted's position in particular so that some of what Dwight was doing could be done by two people, because we just needed more numbers. We needed more data for what we were doing so that we could respond more discreetly to the different trends and patterns. So, if there's ways that people want to partner with us, other questions that people have, we're happy to do it. We didn't mention, actually, that Sandy's still there in the back. We also have a recent, funded by the undergraduate dean, another partnership with Europe. And I mean, we have got a lot of different things where across the campus, the MLCs, different people have been very supportive of our students, and we try to find ways to get them to integrate and do the best they can. So I don't know if people have general questions or anything else, comments. Yeah. Gail?
Yes, with regard to the average GPAs, How much do you account for the differences, essentially, the improvement that you've seen in the past few years? How much of that is attributable to a better bridge program? How much of that is attributable to stuff that just happens later, after bridge? You know, the courses that they choose, the paths that they choose, things like that. Any ideas?
I mean, I could say some of what I personally have seen. It's definitely an area that we could put a lot more quantitative analysis on. I would also say that the one thing, I mean, you should kind of throw your 2 cents in if there's something else. The one thing I noticed with the GPAs, because to me that's sort of concerning, when I have students coming to me saying they want to go to graduate school, I know that you're graduating with a Michigan degree, but that is not a Michigan GPA that will get you into a graduate school. So we started looking at where the issues are, and we see that it's in those early years, some of those gateway courses, that they're kind of carrying with them a low, extremely low GPA in some of their initial courses. And then they hit their stride. It's very typical for us to see somebody, for instance, you know, take Intro to Comm Studies courses, and in the intro course, they're feeling their way around, they're struggling, getting maybe a lower grade, but then they get into Comm Studies courses and they do extremely well. So that trend of our students needing to find ways to succeed early in the gateway classes is one we've been trying to address. And so the math class that we're adding this summer, when we looked at some of the data and saw that over 34% of LS&A students don't ever take Calc, we asked ourselves, well, why are we having every bridge student take Calc? So we changed it so that they're taking a quantitative mathematics theory class, but one that's really written for those students who are humanists, who want to go on to something else and not then come out of bridge with maybe a slightly lowered GPA because we put on them a course that they may not have actually chosen. So we're trying to always look at where they're getting, you know, what's happening, where those grades are difficult. And that's a really small number. So like say for last year out of the 250, we had 10 students for whom it would have been extremely appropriate for them to have a QR option that was not directly Math 105. Anyone else telling us they want to pursue a STEM field or they're going to need Calc, we definitely get them through Calc. But if you're telling me you want to be a philosophy major, a lit major, go into creative writing, that kind of thing, you might need something different. So we're trying to make sure we offer those. I don't know if you have anything.
I think the other thing that happened, our numbers begin to grow really, really big. I think in the last 4 years, we've gone from having 180 students to 240 and 250 students. So we can no longer do what we did in the same way that we did. And so we had to go back and look at some of our courses, redesign some of our assessments, look at what we do. And I think we're doing it better because we had to do it better because we just had too many people to do what we did before, if that makes sense. But I think we tried to evaluate what we do on a regular basis, but because of our numbers were increasing, we've tried to change some of our models and some of the things. At the CSP 100 class, we try to look at how the students experience that class, and every year try to do a better job. And so I think we're doing a better job at presenting the kinds of information that students need to help them continue on.
Yeah.
I think it might be good for us to take just 2 minutes and tell you, because a lot of the right people are in the room here, about this PART program. Okay, so the idea of
do you want to make sure it's on the video?
Sure, why don't we make sure it's on the thing? So the idea of this was that both honors and CSP are programs that bring in students as freshmen and believe that we make a big difference in their lives, their future on campus. So we thought we ought to actually be able to show that we make some difference in their lives on campus. And so we have been working to establish a suite of tools which would enable us to go into the university's data warehouse, pull out a cohort of students at the point when they arrive on campus, follow them through their time on campus until they graduate. So develop a life course portrait of these students. More than just the graduation rate, but in principle, everything about what they do on campus. What do they concentrate in? What classes do they take? When do they take them? What are their grades in those classes? All of that. And then that would give us a picture of what happens to our students. But we also want to, and I think this is the interesting part, to compare our students to students who aren't in our programs in a fair way. So it doesn't make sense to compare the students who enter the honors program to average students in LS&A. In the same way, it doesn't make sense to compare really any individual student on campus with the average. You want to match them in some way, right? So what we're thinking about is how we can generate the kinds of experimental quasi-experimental studies that Steve talked about a couple of talks ago. How we can match our students so that we'll get much more accurate understanding of the impact of a program like honors or CSP on the outcomes of students.
Sandy was going to throw something.
Unfortunately, but so related to that, would you be able to parse out, I'm always looking at students who are in CSP in Europe, students who are in honors in Europe, can you look at that level of detail? Because there's also
Yeah.
We can look at anything that leaves a crumb in the data warehouse. So there has to be something that lives in the data warehouse for us to do that. I think you probably know that if you really want to get all the people who are in Europe, you have to be kind of creative about what you do with the data warehouse, because it's. I guess they are if they're in Europe in their first year. Is that true for second year students too? And
we're trying. There's a course. I'd love to talk more. You have to go put turkey in the oven for our students' party.
We'll talk more, definitely, yeah.
All right, that's enough maybe to get this conversation started. Everyone should think about how they might do that, and we can talk about it now too. Why not?
I think my question is kind of related to yours, but and to some other things that you said at the very beginning of your talk about sort of students, the things that account for student success, being not just academic, but also kind of the way they integrate into the community, the activities they're involved in, mentoring, all that kind of stuff really contributes to retention and graduation rates. And so I'm wondering, in addition to sort of looking at academic success as kind of a marker of like sort of the result of getting that kind of support, maybe, do you look at the support itself? The degree to which they find a faculty mentor, the degree to which they get involved in extracurriculars, that may increase their self-efficacy without necessarily increasing their GPA,
yeah.
I guess. And sort of the relationship between students' perceived self-efficacy and GPA, and whether those always correlate, or whether you can have high efficacy and not, kind of be a B- student and not be okay.
Yeah, I mean, both of you guys should probably say something. Do you want to?
I think we do find that happening, and I think we try to look at the kinds of supports we provide students. If you take our tutoring model, for example, tutoring has a relatively small impact on final grade. It has a remarkable impact on student self-confidence. And so we find that those sorts of interventions help students feel better about their time being here, but it may not result in the same sort of increase in grades.
Right, so then you set up how we measure that.
Yeah, so we purchased an online tool so that tutors can book the appointments, and we can pull the appointments down. We can look at what class are being tutored in, what their success is, because there's a feedback aspect of it. And again, those roadblocks are the ones you typically would imagine would be many of the math and science classes. But again, there has been not only the self-confidence, but learning study skills. The tutor has that one-on-one relationship when they say, how do you study? And they find all of these errors in the ways they've studied, and that's changed, and they're able to move forward. And many of our students, not all, succeed because of their tutoring, or at least go to the next level, which is now I'm going to go to a group learning session like Science Learning Center and move from that point, or form their own study groups. So that's been really positive, and we've seen the measurement of that. But again, it's a tremendous demand. It's at least 300 or more students every semester asking for tutoring. And the earlier they get in, the better they do.
So we can actually see all the students discreetly who are being tutored, the courses they're being tutored in, how many times they actually meet, because after each meeting there's an electronic sort of feedback loop where they're able to give both the tutor and the student respond to how did that go? Did they show up? How did it go? And we actually get information from both sides so that we're sure the students are getting what they want. The tutors have constantly given us feedback on where are there gaps in learning. Some people will often say they're tutoring in science, but they're actually reteaching calc or something, the typical kind of thing. So now we can track that real discreetly. We haven't done as much as maybe we could with it, but we could match and say, how do these type of students who are getting tutoring do with comparable students who did not avail themselves of that?
But I think you're right. I think there are things, the grade point average is not the only result,
Sure.
the only marker for success. And so looking at all those things, how they impact a person individually, I think is also.
Even Mastering Physics talk mentioned that idea that the metrics are there to evaluate students in other ways potentially, if we can figure out the threes.
Yeah.
Right.
So all this stuff that doesn't leave crumbs in the data warehouse right now, but we all have a sense at least, is very important. I think it might be really interesting to have a conversation about how we could get to the point where that kind of richer set of data could actually get collected. And I think that we might be reaching the point where it becomes possible because students are reaching a state where they start to imagine that they should project a version of themselves out into the world. You know, I mean, they do it now to some extent through social media, where they actually want to assemble a portrait of who they are and what they're about and what they care about. And we might be in a place in 5 or 10 years where they're very free about doing that and also view it as important. You know, like that is who you are, is that public version that's out there. There are starting to be people doing health studies where they rely on individuals' desire to share all their information, right? There's a kind of transformation going on. And I wonder if we could think about, you know, how we could help that to happen on campus.
Well, I don't want to respond to that if somebody else has a response, but I'm thinking about something too.
I think it's really interesting time, and you know, we might go through a transition in the next 5 years where suddenly, instead of just being us bureaucrats keeping all the data about everything that happens, the students might actually start to self-generate a richer portrait of who they are because they view it as valuable to them and us to do that.
Well, I mean, I teach in the Sweetland Center, so you know, one of the things you all know that the Writing 100 classes generate these e-portfolios. And Anne was here a month or so ago to talk about, you know, things we do with the directed self-placement essay, but I'm thinking about the e-portfolios as this really rich sort of database of, not really a database, but like a discourse analysis kind of thing that you could do with them where you use computers to read them and pick out words that represent something about students' self-efficacy. There's all this reflective writing in portfolios like that. And if CSP students were keeping portraits of themselves as learners for 4 years, not just one class, you would wind up with a body of data where you could, you know, sort of read a few of them closely, develop a coding system, and then be able to code that and then have a computer sort of read those portfolios for words that represent self-efficacy or words that represent something.
Kelly Allen and I, in particular, did a lot of work with Tiffany on the M portfolio, and within the context of Sweetland. So some of our writing instructors have kind of pushed that envelope in different ways. And then to your point about the CSP 100, we revised that to have you know, increasingly robust use of C tools for different things, for Dropbox, for forums, for topics and conversations, ways where students are willing to have these conversations and learn both from one another, but also to create a database that represents them. So yeah, it's something where we've done it right now, really isolated class by class wise, so that Kelly or Charles or someone could talk to you about their particular classes, but we haven't had anything where we went back and looked at all of it together. Yeah, but it would be good to do because their perception of the experience is something that is the thing that makes a big difference. So Awami does surveys of students, has a sort of longitudinal study, a study of students' perception of their experience on campus when they leave, sort of an outgoing survey. But that's, you know, the only sort of quantitative data that I think people are gathering repeatedly. Well, I was going to suggest thinking more intentionally about a partnership between academic and student affairs, because student affairs, many of their programs are evaluating their own programs, and Melinda Matney has a conference in May where they talk about that evaluation, and there's a platform, Student Voice, where those records are available, and they even are able to share them between units to look at overlap. So I think they're making footprints, but in other spaces.
Yeah, the conversation between student affairs and the academic side of campus is much more limited than it ought to be. I think that's probably fair to say.
That is politic.
Well, I mean, from both sides. I mean, I don't think
it's just time and people knowing who to talk to and knowing that people have interest. I mean, I think that's one nice thing about this group. There's people that we have historic connections to that we could, you know, renew, because truly the other thing to just sort of say out loud is the extreme growth in CSP, which happened just sort of prior to my being with CSP was partly in response to the Prop 2 situation. If we federally wish to have a similar percent of underrepresented minorities as defined federally, you need to just take more people to keep getting the same percent. So what we had was an increase across the board so that we would still get at a similar percent of a cohort we wanted, but we really added. So we started doing two things somewhat suddenly, and that's taken a little time to sort out. But that's actually, I mean, the reason for our growth is just because as an institution we have a commitment to a certain level of diversity, and many people write federal grants that depend on focused diversity that is, ethnically, divided. And that's okay program by program. It's students come in with their identities and they sometimes want to address those. We don't use it in admissions, so now in order to have the same percent, we have to just sort of in admissions take a wider amount. But that was part of why that happened.
I mean, the counterpoint to that is that even though your job is a lot bigger, we're also doing a better job serving.
It's great.
So kind of ignored is too strong a word, but groups of students who did offer that same kind of diversity, but they were overlooked when we were focused on when we could admit toward like an ethnic. Look at people's background.
It was only one metric of diversity, and students will often repeat that the biggest disparity is economic. And so that's where you definitely see in the cohort, in the group of students trying to navigate their differences to the majority, it's really economic is going to be the first sort of identity that they feel dissonance in. And then they may or may not. Many people have, multiple ethnic identities. There's all sorts of dynamics that go on, and we've worked with a number of different organizations on campus to, help people connect in the way they want to. So.
Okay, I think we'll wrap up officially there, and I hope everybody's thinking about projects that can come out of all these conversations, because I really want to see a list at the end of the year of things that people are going to do that they weren't going to do before. Right? There will be a test, yes.
There will be a test.
Well, there will be a report.